My name is Zac Owens, and I am a writer and editor for Monkeys Fighting Robots. And I'm talking here with Mark Russell. Mark, you have written many things over the years, a lot of them really funny, a lot of them very tragic. And the latest one in the line of funny and tragic is Serial. This originally started coming out in your Edgar Allan Poe anthologies through Ahoy Comics, if that's right.
That's
Um,
correct.
yeah, and then you have a graphic novel collecting all of those things and actually adding on three new stories as well.
Right, because people never actually got to see the end of the story during the Edgar Allan Poe series.
Yeah,
So now they get to actually find out how the whole saga ends.
I was like when I heard about Serial, I got all of the Edgar Allan Poe stuff and started reading through it. And when I got to the end, I was like, wait, where's the rest of it?
Right.
I was very happy to hear that this was coming out with three new.
Well, I apologize for everyone who was left in the lurch, but we did have an ending in mind when we started this, and now
Nice.
we get to
Yeah.
do it.
And I'm no spoilers other than it's beautiful and I love the ending that you guys did.
Oh, great.
I'm gonna do a quick just kind of run through of what Serial is so people know what we're talking about. What We Do in the Shadows meets Monster Squad in this dark, distinctly adult, and lovingly funny take on an earlier generation's beloved monsters. The Marquis de Cocoa, recently transformed into a vampire, braves the agony of sunrise to throw his famous breakfast parties, where he plays his deadly games with such oddly familiar characters as the Quaker, Bo Berry, and the Brute. Featuring lush, evocative art by Peter Snæbjerg, this volume collects every chapter from Ahoy's Edgar Allan Poe anthologies plus an all-new three-part conclusion. So essentially, it's we're just doing like a horror story, but featuring the mascots of famous breakfast cereals.
Yeah, obviously for legal reasons, we couldn't use Count Chocula or
Yeah,
Frankenberry,
yeah,
so thinly veiled this, the Marquis de Cocoa instead of Count
yeah,
Chocula, Frankencherry instead of Frankenberry. So
yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
weren't terribly creative or original in our intellectual property theft, um,
It's
but
amazing.
yeah, no, it was weirdly satisfying to write. Being able
Where
to
did this idea come from?
Well, it actually came from Facebook, as most things do, apparently. I had been writing just on a lark these little, paragraph dialogues between Count Chocula and Frankenberry, or Captain Crunch and Frankenberry, and it was all kind of written in this sort of dark Game of Thrones like dialogue,
Yeah,
which I thought was funny. But people started commenting on this, like asking when we were going to get more. And then at some point, when Ahoy asked me if I had any other ideas to pitch to them, I was like, this is something that came up. So I remember how
yeah.
much people liked it when I was just posting these little prose snippets. And I thought this would really come to life much better as a comic book. So I mentioned these serial monsters, and they were all over it.
I mean, it's just incredible because it's one of those things that also just takes the inherent ridiculousness of it and highlights it in a way that you don't even think about. I think there's a line in it where you say, "Oh, to be a vampire famous for his breakfasts," or something like that, because he can't go
Yeah,
out in the
the
sun.
worst mascot you could think of for
I
like
know.
a meal that's eaten in broad daylight.
It's brilliant. Um, so like we mentioned before, these first showed up in your Edgar Allan Poe anthologies. Would you say that Poe was a big influence on the writing, or other than Poe, who were other influences on the writing?
Poe became a bigger influence as the writing went on because the tone kind of changed from just macabre and violent to more poetic, more sort of existential. So I'd say initially, like I mentioned, it was sort of like the gag was these monsters living in sort of a Game of Thrones like universe. But as it sort of wore on, things rarely end the same idea that I began with. And as I wore on, it was really more just about this sort of world of about the internal lives of these monsters and the sort of conflicts and sorrows they've absorbed by virtue of being monsters.
Mm,
Because none of them start out as monsters; they all start out as normal people.
yeah,
Although, ironically, the normal people that never change into monsters were just monsters from the beginning.
yeah.
Like characters like Captain Crunch or General Post, who's the main villain, which I couldn't use General Mills for legal reasons, and I couldn't use Post Serial but I can use general post. So
Oh, nice.
it's but yeah, it really is more about the internal lives of what it would be like to be somebody who was turned into a monster against their will.
Yeah. And I'd never kind of made that connection that happens to all of them in one way or another.
Yeah, it's really macabre when you think about it. Like the mascot of the cereal was a living person who's died, and their ghost is really in the blueberry.
yeah.
Or this is like a resurrected corpse that is like strawberry flavored.
Is that weird that it's making me hungry just thinking about that? Um,
Probably
Probably.
not. Uh, that's the other thing too. That's really sort of ironic is I don't like breakfast cereal. I
Yeah.
don't think I've eaten breakfast cereal since I was like 9 years old, but I felt compelled to write this.
Well, I love breakfast cereal. So the moment I saw this come up, I was super psyched for it. In fact, I pre-gamed this interview with a bowl of Lucky Charms just because, it felt like it would get me in the mood for it.
The Lucky Charms leprechaun, or the Leprechaun King, as he
Yeah.
is in my book, makes is like becomes a major character. As you know, you read it,
Yes.
so
Yes. He's a big part. I want to say like he's the most interesting character, but honestly, I want to say that about all of the characters because they're so interesting and so unique, have such different like trajectories and stuff. None of them are even remotely similar to each other, but they play off of each other so well.
the
Um,
Leprechaun King, I think, has the most regret,
yeah,
which is I think is a lot of times what really makes a character interesting when they're motivated by trying to make up for something they've done in the past, knowing that they'll never be able to like
yeah.
make things right.
He's looking for like redemption, and it's really well done. But you did an amazing interview with Hart Seeley for Ahoy, where you talked about. I think Seeley asked you, does humor need horror to be funny? Does horror need humor to be scary? And you described horror and humor as ingredients in a dish, and you said it's like butter. You don't want just plain horror. You don't want to eat a stick of butter. One of the other things that you play with a lot in, I would say, all of the works I've read by you is the relationship between humor and tragedy. What do you think that relationship is? How do you think those feed off of each other?
Well, I think like tragedy, humor has to have stakes. I
Yeah.
think it can't just be jollity. I
Mhm.
think it's a completely different flavor than humor.
Yeah.
So I think that humor is how we process tragedy. Humor
Mhm.
is how we deny tragedy's victory over us, and that's
Mhm.
really the relationship. I read once, I don't know if it's true, but I read that chimps or our early simian ancestors developed laughter as a response to passing danger. Like they see a
Wow.
snake or an eagle that they're afraid of, and so they're quiet and they're trying not to like let it know it's there, and then it slithers by without eating, and then they laugh. The laughter was like a relief mechanism, like, oh, it didn't get me. So I
Wow.
feel like in a lot of ways that's sort of what our homo sapien brains are still programmed to think of as like laughter is like almost this sort of like nervous uh utterance of relief that the universe didn't get us this time.
Yeah. Wow. I've never heard that before, but that's really interesting. I also feel like um all of the best tragedies and all of the best comedies have such a like rich mix of both. Like for me, the thing that always comes to mind, I think a lot of your work to me actually almost feels Shakespearean because I always think of Romeo and Juliet. Like you start out that first act or two, and it's just like balls to the wall comedy, and then by the end of it, you're like dying inside from what's happening. And it part of it is because you laughed with the characters. You had hope for the characters, like you said, those stakes. There's something to lose by the time you get to the tragic bits.
What I think that a joke, the pattern that a joke follows is very close, similar to like the pattern that a horror movie follows, where you
Mm-hmm.
have like the premise, where there's a zombie outbreak or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the turn. It's like, oh, we're all being eaten, we're forced to hide or whatever, and then there's the twist, how you defeat the zombies or whatever
Yeah,
at the end. And I feel like that's very true. That's like how you tell a joke. And so
yeah,
I feel like there's a sort of natural way that the human brain processes both laughter and tragedy that's extremely similar.
Yeah. You really connect your characters to their original sources in a lot of ways. We already talked about, it's Count Chocula or Coco de Marquis in this. The Coco de Marquis is a vampire who does breakfast cereals, and in a way that obviously the breakfast cereals don't do. You connect the characters to like Coco de Marquis Dracula, and you can feel that Dracula influence. And then Frankenberry is Frankenstein, and you feel that there. How have those old monster movies or old books influenced you? Are those influences on you in general, or?
Yeah, and I feel more like the novels than
Mhm.
the old movies. Like I feel like there's much more of Mary Shelley in a Frankencherry,
Yeah,
Frankenberry,
yeah,
than there is of like the old Boris Karloff.
yeah,
Was he the guy who did Frankenstein?
yeah, yeah,
The old Fritz Long, Frankenstein movies.
yeah.
Uh, so I feel like yeah, they're inherently, I think, Shakespearean novelistic characters because something has been given to them. In this
Mhm.
case, in the case of the vampire, eternal life. In the case
Yeah,
of the Frankenstein creature, just life.
yeah,
But something even bigger has been taken from them.
yeah. Interesting. Um, did they play those books? Did they play any part in making you want to write this? Were they any? Yeah.
Not really. What really made me want to write it is, well, it usually starts out where I'll just write a few of the, I just have an idea and I'll just write a few sort of blurbs about it,
Mhm.
and that'll be the end of that.
Yeah.
But if I can't let it go, if I, I wrote a few sort of funny things on Facebook, like dialogues, but then if I can't let it go, or if I'm still thinking about like, oh, there's more, or where does he live? Then I
Yeah.
realize there's probably something there
Yeah.
where I have to, it's like a uh, a leak turns into a flood.
Yeah. I get you. Um, at one point of your script, you make the case for cowardice and survival being the same thing. Um, in some ways, that's kind of like feels tough to read, like, because I think that we've been through a lot of things as like a society in the last few years where it almost feels like keep your head down, just get through this. Um, how do you feel that concept applies to us here in the real world? Do you feel that
Well,
concept?
I want to make it clear that's not my default philosophical position,
Mhm.
but I do feel like in a character that has enormous regret or feels like they have cost the other people their lives. That's sort
Mhm.
of a way. I think it's the Leprechaun King who says that,
Yeah.
and I think it's because he has such enormous regret that he feels that in order to actually regain his his right to live, he has to lose his life.
Yeah. So I think that's also just a testament to your writing that when you read that kind of thing, it has so much like oomph to it that in a lot of ways I just read that and went, oh wow, yeah, this is what Mark believes.
Yeah, I think that's the way you feel if you have done something so horrible that you feel like there's no salvation,
Yeah,
that there's no way I can ever make this right. But every moment that I remain alive, not trying to make it right, is an act of moral cowardice.
yeah. Do you feel that there's any truth to that?
I do, in the sense that you have to. I think in life you do have to put yourself in the game. I
Yeah,
think that it is like kind of a cowardly way to live, to never be invested at all in the world around you, or to think
yeah,
that it will take care of itself. You don't have to actually pitch in and stand up for things you believe in.
yeah.
And I do think that to live is to live in the world. And there's a great quote from the Gospel of Thomas, the non-canonical Gospel of Thomas. I'm going to
Mhm.
paraphrase here, but it basically says, "Your heart can save you if you let it change the world, but the world will destroy you if you do not let it change your heart." And I
Mhm.
feel like that is really true for me. Like you have to, in order to live a complete human life and to feel like you're a good person, you have to, both be willing to sort of interact and change the world, and to let the world change you.
Wow.
And that's an act of courage.
How do you feel Do you feel that applies, like in broad strokes, to what we're going through at the moment? We have just gotten out of a pandemic a few years. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, yeah,
I feel like the moment we're going through in history right here is very Hamletian, in that it would
yeah,
be very easy to say let the United States backslide or forward slide into this new sort of fascist autocracy without a rule of law. It's
yeah,
much harder to fight for things that only have abstract value to us, or
yeah,
to fight for things when you can still, everything seems fine on the surface, and you could still get like you know a $4 cheeseburger,
hmm,
but that's not really living intentionally. That's not
yeah,
really thinking about you as a being of the world.
yeah. Um, Sorry, I'm just reading off of these questions here and got so into that one that I lost my place. But here we are. So this isn't the first time you've taken characters who are kind of ridiculous or seemingly two-dimensional.
Or from it,
Yeah, and humanize them. You did it
I,
with
I sort of live in the realm of the ridiculous.
yeah, but you did it like especially with uh series like Snagglepuss, and with the Flintstones, which other serial mascots, that there's that connection there, among others. But what is it that you like about these characters that we tend to take for granted?
Well, I think about the situation that the premise this person's in, and and I can understand, this is pop culture that was made for immediate and
Mhm.
disposable consumption when it was made. You weren't supposed to think too much about the backstories or the realities of these people and what it would be like to be a caveman with electricity and household appliances.
Yeah,
But to me, that's always where my mind goes. It's like
yeah,
I remember as a kid watching the Flintstones and thinking, he takes a picture of this camera, and this tiny bird comes out of the camera and chisels an image on a little stone tablet.
yeah,
That's the picture. And then the bird goes back into the camera until God knows when, until who knows when he's going to need another picture. And
yeah,
to me, even as a kid, I found that sort of horrifying.
yeah,
But you're not meant to really think about that or dwell upon it. You're supposed to concentrate on the story they're telling you. But I think that's what draws me to these characters. I feel like the story they're not telling you is so much more interesting.
yeah. If you could take any character that you feel people kind of generally underestimate and make a series about them, who would that be?
I would like to do something in the Donald Duck universe, specifically with Scrooge McDuck. But the Carl Barks created this intricate family tree of all the ducks and the
Yeah.
ganders, and I just feel like you could do something like very some sort of multi-generational dynastic storytelling that's never really been done with those characters. But you
Almost like
tell
a Russian novel kind of.
Yeah, you could do a Russian novel about the ducks and the ganders and the various
Yeah,
branches of the Donald Duck family.
that would be I'd read that in a heartbeat. Um, so this is definitely not one of those books where you just throw out some jokes and then end it all in a bow. You wrestle with what makes people monsters. You talk about home, about redemption, about the desire to kind of like, and we talked about this a little bit of shutting out the evil and just closing your eyes until it's gone. Were these themes you were already wrestling with, or did that wrestling kind of start on the page?
No, I these are themes I've wrestled with in a lot of my writing, and I think in life. It's like, what is it? Where is the tipping point? At
Mhm.
which point you're no longer the person you thought you were, and
Yeah.
you're on a different course now. And I think in the case of Frankencherry, it is the loss of home and family. Like
Mm.
that was what was tethering him to the world. And when all that's gone and he's no longer recognizable by those who he was closest to, and everyone runs in fear of him, then what choice does he have but to live as a monster?
Yeah. Because I think the quote that you have in there is a monster is just someone without a home. Um,
Yeah, it's just somebody, I think what keeps a lot of people from going down dark and destructive paths is you're worried about what it will do to the people in your lives, the people you care about. Once
yeah,
all that's taken from you, it's like you might still choose to not go down those paths, but the major obstacle that keeps you from choosing is gone.
yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. I feel like when people live in community, there's more like accountability present with that.
Yeah, and there's internal accountability because you
Yeah.
just, if even if nobody catches you, you care about these people. You don't want
Yeah.
them to be hurt, and even if it's very minor, you don't want them to be ashamed of you. You don't
Yeah.
want them. You don't want to live as something less than how you think you live with this community that you imagine loves you, and
Mhm.
you don't want that to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Um, so this is a script where you can really feel the love that you have for your characters. Um, and like I said, even little moments where I kind of read that and I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely what Mark believes because you write it with such conviction. Um, and you can also kind of feel the ache when things go wrong for them, or even just the bittersweetness of things working out but costing so much. Which character broke your heart most to write, if you're able to share that?
Yeah, I think that the one that really I felt the strongest for, and I really felt was like kind of the most tragic on a personal level was Frank and Cherry.
Mhm.
See,
Yeah,
I think he was so noble and majestic and wanted to do the right thing, and just had it all taken from him against his will.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, he has such a I again won't go into it, but like the conclusion is so bittersweet. There's so many aspects to conclusions for different characters in this that have a really lovely angle to them, while also having the angle of, wow, this whole journey has cost them so much. They're never going to be the same. It would be a absolute crime to go through this chat without talking about Peter Snæbjerg's incredible art. Am I pronouncing
Oh
his
yeah,
last name right?
Snaberg, yeah.
Snæbjerg.
But yeah, you're right. His artwork is absolutely amazing in this, and he captures the sort of right, you know, uh, tone of
Yeah.
between darkness and humor. I think just
Yeah.
perfect.
And it's like you go back and forth between like this satirical aspect to it, like the Le Duc l'Orange and stuff like that just looks so ridiculous in some panels, and then three panels later looks really menacing and believably menacing. And it's not one of those things where you're like, oh, this looks like a different character. The transition is seamless. um was it Ahoy that put Snaberg on the project, or did you ask
Yeah,
for
no, he's done a few things for Ahoy, and so they were familiar with him. They had a working relationship with him, so they're the ones that chose Peter. But it was like a choice from heaven. I
Yeah.
think they just really sort of understood that his sensibility would work for this material.
What
I think
about his
Tom
art?
Pryor, I think, is the one that matched him up with the serial
Okay,
stories.
gotcha. What about his work do you feel made him perfect for this series?
There's moments I think when I really begin to appreciate that an artist is right for a project, it's when it's not like splash pages or battle scenes or whatever. It's
Hmm.
these sort of smaller panels where you get the character's response.
Hmm.
And if they get the emotions of the character right, and they're not necessarily like, bright or shiny emotions like terror or diabolical laughter, but just sort of like a person thinking about what they've just done,
Yeah,
or someone sort of lost in their own sort of heartbreak. I think once they get those moments right, it's like, yeah, this they are. It's not just that they understand what's happening in the script; they understand what's happening in the story, which
yeah.
is really the main.
And I think that's exactly it that kind of strikes that balance that we were talking about between almost like the ridiculous and the human. Is it's the subtlety of the expressions and emotion that make you go, oh wow, this cartoon vampire is
Right.
breaking my heart right now. You know?
There's some artists who paint, or that create with like the 8 crayon box of
Hmm.
Crayola, and there's some that have the 64 crayon
Yeah,
box.
yeah,
And Peter is definitely one of those artists that has the 64 crayon box.
yeah, absolutely. Um, Also, are you working on any other projects at the moment that you're excited about, or is there anything that you're able to tell us about at the moment?
Yeah, yeah. I'm working on some more Second Coming with Ahoy. I've
Mhm.
got My Bad Volume 3, which is coming out at some point. They haven't announced yet. And also, we're doing a fourth series of Second Coming. So I'm
Nice.
excited for both of those. I've already written 2 issues of the second coming one. Also doing, I don't think it's been announced yet, but I'll just sort of teaser it. I'm doing a series with Dark Horse, which I've never done a series with Dark Horse before, but it's the fictitious life of a silent film star. Um,
Okay.
so hopefully that will come out at some point in 2024.
That's awesome. That sounds so cool. Um, well, Serial is going to be available. Tell me if I've got this right. It's the 11th of October in bookstores and the 12th in comic shops.
I think that's right.
Okay.
If not exactly, like the basically the second week of October, in
Yeah,
time for Halloween purchases.
which is fantastic. Are
Yeah,
you a big fan of Halloween yourself?
I enjoy it. I don't know if I would call myself a big fan. I'm a costume optional Halloween goer, but
Hmm.
I like the idea of like just taking a day off to sort of just be sort of to be
Spooky.
a little to be a little spooky,
Yeah.
and I like the fact that it's a holiday that works equally well for kids and for adults.
Yeah.
Like
Good idea.
some holidays are very kid centric, and you're just sort of like, I'll just, I got to take the kids to the fireworks show or whatever. And then some days it's like, some holidays are like, oh, the mom and dad are going to get drunk at the Irish bar. Hopefully they'll come home alive. But
Yeah.
Halloween's a good sort of,
Mix of both.
mix of both.
Yeah.
Everyone, it's fun for everyone.
Nice. You gonna do a Marquis de Cocoa costume for it, or one of the others?
That's a good question. Yeah, maybe I'll find 2 other people and we'll do the Rice Krispie
Oh,
character
nice. That would be awesome.
on the
Um,
tavern. Ye
yeah.
crisp rice.
And then just a bonus question for you. Do you feel like there's any, this is just kind of a broader question. Do you feel like there's any comic that you kind of feel got you into comics in the first place or has been a big part of your DNA in your career as a writer?
Well, the one that sort of floored me when I read it, and it made me think like, wow, this is like I found a whole new room in the house I had no idea existed,
Yeah.
and I couldn't get enough of was Flaming Carrot, Bob Burden's comic in the late '80s, early '90s,
Yeah.
which I just thought was like the most imaginative and sort of off the wall funny thing I'd ever read.
It's been on my list for a while. I've seen it. Is it? Am I right in saying that the Mystery Men came out of that, or something along
Yeah,
those
the
lines?
Mystery Men showed up as characters in Flaming Carrot and then had their own sort of series.
Yeah,
But yeah, Flaming Carrot was sort of the genesis of that.
nice. I definitely have to check that out. And anybody who is watching this or listening to this also has to check out Serial. Like I said, it's coming out on the 11th of October or 12th of October, depending where you're getting it from. And it is a fantastic series. Thank you, Mark, not only for this talk, but for just putting together a wonderful comic. It's going to be up there as one of my all-time favorites for sure.
Well, thank you, Zach. This has been really fun.